Hi guys, welcome to the second episode of From the Gargoyle's Ledge. Today we'll be covering the true origins of vampires. See, the whole world knows about vampires, but very few know where they actually originated, nor where the word vampire comes from. There is no denying that Western culture has fully adopted the vampire folklore. No other mythical being in Western history has been adapted so greatly to so many genres and mediums as vampires. Which other being has been a scary half-human creature as shown in Nosferatu, a suave, good-looking aristocrat like Bela Lugosi's Dracula, and a sarcastic grandfather in the Monsters, and even an educational character used to teach children to count on Sesame Street. But even though film and TV alone make up literally hundreds of vampire adaptations in the West alone, it is only the tip of the iceberg when one considers the other ways it has infiltrated Western culture. Complete sagas have been written on the subject, ranging in genre from horror to comedy and romance. Music groups have adopted vampirism as their personas, and have even gone as far as to create religions or commit horrible crimes in the name of the myth. Even though our Western society has been oversaturated with vampires, perhaps to the point of being cliché and boring, very few to none of them come close to expressing not only the myth itself, but why certain steps are taken to eradicate a suspected vampire. Over time, many different authors, historical figures, and even countries have been incorrectly credited with the creation of vampires. Some will claim Romania gave birth to vampires, others will claim a few authors can be credited, while others still will claim it was Vlad the Impaler who gave rise to the myth. All are incorrect. The actual country who came up with both the myth and the name vampire, that is V-A-M-P-I-R, was actually another Eastern European country, a country known as Serbia. The people and places incorrectly credited with the myth of vampires are almost as varied as the adaptations since. Many will argue that Romania gave birth to vampires through their own mythical, undead creature known as the Strigoi. They are claimed to be spirits that are at unrest, who are able to take the form of animals and drink blood of living for sustenance. Though more modernly, Strigoi were written about by Wilhelm Schmidt in an 1865 article on Transylvanian folklore. He claimed the Strigoi were nocturnal creatures that fed on infants, something parents would counteract by throwing a stone over their shoulder and saying aloud, "This," into the mouth of the Strigoi. The earliest reference to Strigoi was a woman by the name of Jua Grando Alilovic, who was believed to be a living Strigoi. She lived between the years of 1579 and 1656. Vlad the Impaler is also credited as starting the vampire myth. Vlad the Impaler was born in 1431 in Romania and ruled Wallachia 3 times before dying in Romania in 1476. A few authors have also been incorrectly credited. John Polidori has been credited with creating the myth after his 1819 book named Vampire, spelled V-A-M-P-Y-R-E. Those well not versed with the myth will also claim Bram Stoker's 1897 book, Dracula, created the myth. But the earliest known reference to vampire was by the Serbian emperor, Stefan Dušan, who in 1349 outlawed vampirism, as well as the exhuming of bodies in fear of vampires, in the criminal code which he authored. A full 230 years before the first reference Strigoi was even born, 82 years before Vlad the Impaler was born, 470 years before John Polidori's book, and a whopping 548 years before Bram Stoker's Dracula. While it's clear that the perceived threat of vampires was very real in Serbia since at least 1349, it wasn't until the 16 and 1700s it would reach its peak. In the year 1724, a Serbian peasant named Peter Blajegovic died in a Serbian village, at the time known as Kisilova, which is thought to be the village currently known as Kisiljevo. At this time, parts of Serbia were under Austrian rule. Upon his death, he was buried as usual, but in the 8 days following, 9 villagers would suddenly succumb to a mystery illness. On their deathbeds, they would claim Peter came and attacked them during the night, causing the mystery illness that they were now plagued with. His wife also came forward, claiming that Peter had visited her during the night, where he not only asked her for his shoes, but moved hers to other locations within the house. His wife was so afraid, she soon left the village. An alternate version exists of this story. It is said that Peter Blajegovic returned to his house after death, demanding food from his son. On his son's refusal, he attacked and killed him. No matter which version one chooses to believe, the outcome was not only the same, but well documented. Panic had set in, and the villagers were demanding that Blagojevic's tomb be opened, all for the purpose of looking for signs that he was indeed a vampire. The villagers demanded that the man in charge of their Austrian-ruled Serbian village, as well as a priest, must be present on inspection of the body. Camarul Provizor Frambold first denied their request. He instead wanted to ask permission from authorities in Belgrade, but the Serbian villagers were frantic. They threatened to abandon the village completely if their demands were not met immediately. Fearing a revolt, he obliged. Blagojevic's body was exhumed, and on inspection, Frombold and the priest were astonished to find the body displayed hallmarks of vampirism. It is said and reported that Blagojevic's body showed no signs of decomposition, even though the exhumation took place 2 months after his burial. His body also seemed to have nails, a beard, and hair that seemed to continue to grow after his death. He also had fresh blood in the corners of his mouth. The villagers were convinced Blagojevic was indeed a vampire. They then took the steps to destroy his corpse. A wooden stake was driven through his heart. It is claimed that the wound left by the stake gushed fresh blood. He was then set on fire. Even though the folklore of the vampire existed literally hundreds of years before the Blagojevic incident in Serbia, it would be this one single case that would give birth to the folklore of vampires outside Serbia's confines. First it spread through Europe, then the rest of the world. Blagojevic's case would first be reported in an Austrian newspaper very soon after the incident. It would then be picked up by other publications and spread throughout Europe. Dr. James Lyon, a Balkan historian, is not only a strong believer of the creation of the vampire myth in Serbia, he also claims that the Western world can credit their knowledge of the myth to this single instance. 1 year after Blagojevic was exhumed, staked, and set on fire, another Serbian man would be accused of becoming a vampire after death. Arnold Pavle, a Serbian Hajduk. A Hajduk is either a criminal or freedom fighter, depending on the time in history and who's telling the story. Arnold moved to a village known as Madveja from another part of Serbia. He would often speak of being harassed by a vampire in a place he called Kosovo, which is more than likely today's Kosovo. He claimed that in one of his attacks from the vampire, he managed to kill it, but not before being bitten in the forehead. He claims to have completely cured the symptoms of the bite by eating dirt from the vampire's grave and smearing its blood over him. Arnold would die of a broken neck in 1725 after falling from a cart. Following his death, 4 people in the village suddenly died. His body, like Blagojevic's, would be exhumed, except it would be the authorities who demanded the post-mortem ritual be done, something that is reported by the authorities themselves they had done many times before. Arnold was exhumed, and 2 Austrian doctors examined him. They deemed him to be a vampire. On examination, they recorded their findings. The accounts of Austrian authorities that were present back up their claims. On inspection, Arnold had grown, quote, new skin, as well as hair and nails. Blood was present on his lips, eyes, nose and ears. He was staked through the heart, at which point it is claimed he let out a blood-curdling shriek. He was then set on fire and decapitated. His 4 supposed victims were then exhumed and treated to the same ritual. Arnold's case was also widely reported. This time, it was backed up with the reports of the 2 doctors that examined him, as well as the authorities that were present. There are a bunch of other accounts from the same period, some of which had multiple victims of different ages, others were single or few victim instances. I won't cover these other instances here, as this is meant to be a short supplementary episode. I also fear the names of the victims and the villages they occurred in will make it hard for people not familiar with the language, hard to follow. And the reports don't vary that much anyway. But the cases I've covered are not Serbia's favourite case of vampirism. One figure stands well above the others, a vampire by the name Sava Savanovic. I won't go into great detail of the Sava folklore, as it's more of a story than an account. I may cover the full story in a later episode sometime in the future. Sava Savanovic haunted an old watermill in the town of Zarodje. He would feast on the blood of villagers, as well as those who worked in the mill. One villager who accidentally saw Sava decided to stake out the mill. During the stakeout, the villager hears Sava talking to himself, exclaiming, "Sava Savanovic, you've been a vampire for more than 90 years, and have never gone without a meal, as you have this night." On hearing that, the villager comes out from the cover and shoots Sava with 2 pistols. The villager claims triumph to the village, at which point they decide that Sava's grave must be found and his body destroyed. For this, they'll need a black horse, holy water, and wooden stakes. The horse to find Sava's grave, holy water to put down his throat to drown butterflies and moths that they believed would come from his mouth, and wooden stakes to bind him to his coffin. The horse finds Sava's grave. The villagers open his coffin to reveal a fresh corpse that is bloated from drinking blood. They attempt to put the holy water down his throat, but drop the vial, which wakes Sava. A moth escapes his mouth because of the mistake. He is then killed via stake to the heart. The moth that escapes his mouth was thought to have killed many children before disappearing, never to be seen again. Sava is so well known that the town where this took place uses him and the story for tourism. A few interesting tidbits. In early Serbian folklore, and up until the story of Sava, wooden stakes driven through the heart were not to kill the vampire. They were used to bind the vampire to his coffin, like a big wooden nail. Fail-safes were also put in place, should the vampire be able to remove the stake. Their legs would be bound, appendages cut off, or heavy objects such as boulders or large piles of rocks would be placed on top of the gravesite to stop the vampire opening his coffin. Early Serbian folklore also believed that if a vampire was to lose his or her death shroud, they'd lose all of their vampiric powers. Because of that, many vampires were reported as wearing their death shrouds when seen by the living, probably to stop anyone stealing them, and in turn losing their powers. Serbian death shrouds of the time covered one from neck to the feet, and it is where the stereotypical cape in Western adaptations comes from. And for the last tidbit, the first time the word vampire was quoted in a Western dictionary was 1732, just 8 years after Blagojevich's exhumation, which shows just how fast the account spread. Well guys, that concludes the episode. I've had great fun researching this case, especially the case of Arnold Pavle, as the incident took place just 50 kilometers south of where the Serbian part of my family is from. I thought it would make a good subject for the podcast, mainly because the bulk of the information isn't in English, but also because of how many people are unaware of the actual true origins of the vampire. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'll be covering a